Monday night, we almost went 2 hours on Monday night with mentoring the conversation on conflict of resolutions, and there was one of the discussions that John brought up was a case, and a judge had kind of written some words about how the legal description should be, I guess, transferred, is probably the best words to say that, right? And it was rather interesting, and so it was kind of a conversation starter for Monday leading into tonight, like being tonight procedures of locating boundaries by described words, right? And so we kind of joked about it a little bit on Monday night about how this judge wrote the legal descriptions on this case. So it was such an interesting conversation, but so I think it kind of played well into tonight as well. So
Good. Yeah.
For those that maybe catch mentoring or wisdom Wednesdays and maybe don't watch mentoring Mondays, it was week 94, which will be posted this week at some point, and so you can cross-reference that back. I won't do our little disclaimer. We'll leave all this conversation on here. So
okay.
Yeah, it's good.
Well, let's jump into it then.
Yeah, let's do it.
This has been the most frustrating and enjoyable chapter. I think if this chapter should be required reading for every surveyor. I think this hit everything that we've tried to talk about and try and just pull out of the book. It's all been put into this, in my mind. But the frustrating part is procedures for locating boundaries, and it's the described by words part. My mind kept going, well, what does that have to do with anything? I mean, this is just procedures for surveying, period, end of story. This is how you should be doing it. And so I kept looking for like that caveat. Well, by words, why was that in there? So that's why it was frustrating, because every time I read through it, I'm like, okay, well, what am I supposed to get out of here that I'm not? I just want to start here. Let's see if I can, there's my mouse here. This third sentence here, I just wanted to read through this. When presenting a problem to a surveyor, most clients feel the surveyor should immediately rush into the field and commence surveying by conducting measurements, at times with no basis or understanding what it is he or she is looking for. Such a procedure is unrealistic because documentary evidence and map evidence must first be researched, examined, and verified, going back, if possible, to the original documents that created the original boundaries. A complete analysis of the problem is essential. I had a great conversation Monday night at the STEM fair about the difference between a county surveyor and a private surveyor, because he was asking me what type of surveyor I was and what I do versus what the other does, and I explained to him, at least in Utah, again, the county surveyor really only has two functions: one, preserving the section monumentation, and two, filing any records of survey that a private surveyor does. But it was a really interesting conversation about just this. We can't just get called by a client and say, go set my corners, and we walk out there, we set the corners, and we walk away, and it's a 3-hour ordeal to go set it. As much in this technology age as we think it should be that easy, there is quite a bit more that goes into that, and a lot of that will be area dependent. If you're in inner city, highly surveyed, that process becomes easier because more people have worked through that area or surveyed in that area versus a more rural one. The other thing with this chapter that stood out to me, and I think we'll get back into the way we did it with some of these bigger ones, is there were 21 principles that this tried to cover. So in essence of time, because we could really spend 2-3 hours in this chapter looking at procedures.
We can always break it up if we need to too. So
yeah,
let's see how the flow goes. Yeah.
But what I want to do is let's just read through all the principles, kind of like we've done in the past, and let's pull out if there's any ones that you guys want to just touch base on or spend more time on. Let's kind of get that list compiled, and then as we go through the chapter, we know which ones to spend more time on. So If everyone's okay with that, we'll just start by going through these principles. Principle 1, original surveys create boundaries. They must be considered in any conveyance made for the purpose of identifying land on the ground prior to or as a consideration of conveyancing. Principle 3, the retracement of original boundaries requires the retracing surveyor to go to the field armed with the original documents that are the evidence created by the creating surveyor. Principle 3, surveyors of original surveys are for the purpose of relocating the original surveyor's lines in the same position as they were originally marked, and as such, they can only be conducted by the entity that created the original boundaries. A subsequent surveyor who follows after the original surveyor, except one who may be in privity with the original surveyor, only conducts a retracement, and as such, the work is open to collateral attack. Principle 5, original surveys that divide land are or may be regulated by statute or other legislative action, but once a conveyance is made according to the land division, the location of the land parcels described is to be interpreted by the courts. The boundary surveyor has no judicial authority when resurveying or retracing boundaries for clients. The force of the property surveyor's authority is derived from the reputation and respect. Judicial authority can be granted only by and through the courts. And I'd really like to spend some time on this one when it gets into the reputation and respect. There's some bits in here about marketing, so that's kind of that's mine. I'd love to discuss more and get people's thoughts on. In fact, let me just highlight that real fast. The surveyor must uncover sufficient evidence and facts about the boundaries being retraced. In this sense, the surveyor is a fact finder. The surveyor must then reach conclusions from the facts. It is the quality of these conclusions that is the mark of a professional. As a minimum, a boundary surveyor who decides to make a survey or a retracement from a written description assumes the responsibility for obtaining copies of 1, the necessary adjoining conveyances called for in the legal description furnished, 2, all maps called for, 3, pertinent recorded adjoining surveys, 4, public agency maps that are kept in such a form that they are available, and 5, in the GLO state's original government township plats and field notes. Principle 9, the final decision of which document should be used to locate a survey should be made by the surveyor. Principle 10, the boundary surveyor does not decide who owns the lands or the rights in the land. The surveyor's responsibility is only to locate land boundaries and, except for special agreements with respect to unwritten rights, only locate land in accordance with the written documents. Principle 11, surveyors should never agree to locate all existing easements relating to or affecting property. The surveyor should merely agree to locate those easements in accordance with furnished descriptions and those that are visible or a public record. Principle 12, in a description, no one corner, whether monumented or not, is superior to any other corner. Each has equal survey and legal weight in retracing a description. Principle 13, except where a senior right is interfered with, record or legal monuments, if called for in a conveyance, and if found undisturbed, indicate the true intent of the original parties, and as such control. If called for monuments cannot be found, or if they are found disturbed, their former position may be identified by competent witness testimony or acceptable physical indicators of boundaries. Principle 14, the surveyor should hunt and search in the field until best available evidence is found on which to base the boundary retracement survey. Time should not be a consideration. Principle 15, possession may memorialize original survey lines and, as such, may be the best or worst evidence of original lines. Principle 16, an original monument found undisturbed usually expresses the intent of the parties of the conveyance, fixes the point as between the parties, and, as such, has no error in position. All restored monuments established by measurement have some error in position. Principle 17, the magnitude of permissible uncertainty of measurements is always determined by a court's interpretation. Principle 18, the error of measurement originally permitted when tying original monuments together is independent of the accuracy required to reestablish an original lost monument position. In Principle 19, in the absence of the owners specifying an unusually high precision coupled with an accurate survey, it is presumed that the surveyor will work to that precision consistent with the purpose for which it will be used or the standard of the profession in that locality. Principle 20, every property survey should result in the preparation and delivery of a report or plat, whether or not it is to be recorded. And finally, Principle 21, the surveyor should conduct each survey as if it will ultimately be contested before a court. Okay, there we go. Any of those stick out to you guys?
Okay, and our time's up for tonight.
Thanks, Gary. Any of those stick out that we really definitely want to hit or cover tonight?
I think, we talk about it. I jokingly say every time I'm mentoring Mondays, right? Your map has to leave your office and it has to be defendable, Principle 21 is probably the most simple and easiest that every surveyor should live by, right? And so I think that one's done.
Yeah, absolutely.
That one stands by itself, all by itself. That's the ethics behind the profession. That's everything, right? So
Yep.
Until just very recently, principle number 20, the delivery of a report or plat. Prior to about 4 years ago, when we revamped our minimum standards in Wisconsin, a report was not required as part of a resurvey that was performed, a boundary survey. And now we've got that put in there, which I think is a wonderful thing to have added to our minimum standards. I don't know how many other states don't have that requirement, but how else can you explain what you actually found out in the field to try to do that just on the face of a map by itself?
Nevada does not have that requirement. And I wish we did, because I see stuff like Indiana and all these other ones where you're doing the survey reports on the face of the plat. And I think we've even talked about it before, even on this one, about California having some of that, right? Like it's going to be a tough nut to crack to try to get some of these states. Nevada is actually working on a standards of practice committee as well right now, but I would like to see it. And just moving forward, I'd like to see it because there's so much information you can put on there.
Yeah, Utah has we call it the narrative on the plat, on the survey that's required on the survey. And it's interesting because when we first passed the statute that required the narrative on the survey, we were getting narratives that said the client, I did this survey because the client wanted it. And over the years, it's almost become a competition between the surveyors, it seems, to who can write the best narrative. And we're getting some amazing narratives now that might take up an entire sheet number 1, explaining course by course, monument by monument, what was found, what was set, what information was used. I mean, it just, some of the surveyors just go almost to the extreme in the opposite direction now.
Yeah.
There's an incredible wealth of information there in those narratives.
That's
and
awesome.
The only reason we have those narratives is for us. Nobody else is going to use them.
Right.
They're for the future generation. Who's going to retrace your footsteps?
Exactly.
And leaving good, clear footsteps for them to follow.
Exactly.
I like this class because it commits me to do what John's just talking about, being a Utah surveyor. Sometimes my narrative is on that because the client requested it, but it's a lot survey and the narrative can be very simple, but this talking about it helps remind me and commit me to do better, right? And be more even on a simple one. I think that's the point of this, right? But I do appreciate that.
Yep.
Anything else stand out, or we'll just start kind of going through the book here?
I like it when we talk about best practices here because I think it's helping disseminate where the standard is of acceptable or a higher level of professional practices versus just, throwing it together at the minimum level.
And I think those narratives that when you type them out, right, help you kind of realize what you've done, and is it worth it, or is it a good survey, or any of that kind of stuff, right? When you start to kind of write a paragraph down, I think it makes you kind of look back at it and go, huh, I wonder if I can I wonder if I can defend that. Let me see if I right. So taking the exercise of actually writing that narrative, I think it's great. So
Wonderful. Yeah. Now I've got to go through here and line these up. Thanks, Trent, for not having it. I'm just kidding.
I know, I'm sorry. I got it
I
on
got my book, my paper book all marked up here.
I know. I don't know what's up. I'll keep playing with it.
No, it's fine. It's fine.
It is a pain sometimes listening to your own narrative, or I mean, reading your own narrative.
Yeah.
What was I thinking there?
Especially after a few years, right?
Mhm.
The older self goes, what in the hell did I do there?
Yeah.
Yeah.
11.2. This is what I'm thinking we'll do here. Because a lot of this covers some of the topics we hit on these every time we do this, right? There's some recurring themes in the Mentoring Monday and even Wisdom Wednesdays here. We've hit some of the stuff that this chapter talks about just by our side topics. What I think is there's a few things I've highlighted, and then I'd like to actually get into the field procedures portion of the book, and I think we'll cover most of the principles in doing that. But I'd really like to see that standard of practice. If we were to put a standard of practice for field procedures, lining out the crews, getting the crews out there, I think that's what I really enjoyed out of this chapter. So I'm going to go through some of the thoughts that I highlighted here, and then I think we can jump into those. There's a lot of lists in this one. I think we'll do a lot more reading than we have in the past and look through what they've written. 11.2, it says, locating land described in a written conveyance is a great challenge to the surveyor. It is detective work. It is the process of discovering what transpired in the past. It is the understanding of past events, including the meaning of words, then and now, the evidence left by them as predicated by evidence in history. It is the final conclusion from the facts discovered. It is a professional service to the client. I love that explanation of land surveying. We talk about what is surveying and all that type of stuff. I love this explanation right here. That is what we do. I think that's something that we would speak more to, about the complexity of what we do, more than just we locate boundaries. We are detectives. We are historians. We are this, and it is a professional service to the client. And that's what makes us licensed professionals. And that really sets things apart there, just to get the thought process going.
Those are really very complex systems that we are evaluating when we're retracing a boundary. I think that's in part why a lot of people say, well, the art and science of establishing a boundary or retracing a boundary, and a lot of times things that have high complexity that kind of seem almost like they're happening as magically, we tend to attribute them to art, but really it is a very complex hierarchical systems with a lot of different influences that is being analyzed very systematically, and those are hard to describe in simple words, but what it takes, it's a long process.
Absolutely. And this is that process. When locating boundary lines of any parcel that are called for in an existing conveyance, the surveyor may be required to do some or all of the following 4 steps. Retrace lines run in original survey, conduct an original survey, resurvey for the purpose of correcting or repositioning a former survey, survey the possession lines. So there's a lot as you start digging into how do you do a boundary survey. There's a lot of little functions in that. Looking here, so the next part I highlighted here, and please stop me if you guys want to discuss or go over more, but I want to get through some of these so we can get into kind of the field procedures of this. If a conveyance of land refers its boundaries to monuments not actually existing at the time of the deed was signed, and the parties afterward deliberately erect monuments as and for those described, they will be bound by them in the same manner as if those monuments had been placed before the conveyance. The monuments, whether they embrace more or less than the deed, are controlling whether the deed is given to conform to them or they are erected to conform to the deed. These cases raise questions which must be answered by the surveyor. Are the monuments described a result of a survey, or is the survey a result of the monuments that were created in a conveyance? And that gets to that trying to feel comfortable with gathering all the evidence and trying to make an answer to those decisions that we've talked about. How do you know which one came first in many cases, and how do you honor those, if there are some discrepancies in there, and again, like Trent said, defend your survey at the back end of what you came up with. In each of these areas where monuments were set after the execution of the conveyance, the setting of monuments control only when done by the parties to the deed. The U.S. Supreme Court's theory was that when the parties to the deed set the monuments, the deed showed their original intent. Since later purchasers were not a party to the original deed, their acts do not disclose the original intent of the parties to the deed, and thus are inferior to the chain of evidence. And Principle 2 here talks a little bit about a retracement survey and a resurvey. And that kind of opened up my mind. I understood a little bit the difference between those two, but this definitely expanded that for me. A retracement in its strictest sense is not a resurvey, but the surveyor uses survey methods to do the investigative work. For practical purposes, it is work that is conducted to find evidence using surveying methods. To know where to begin and what to look for, the retracing surveyor must go back to the original documents that created the line and the corners of the original tract. As generally used, a resurvey without qualifications has this connotation. Location of land described by a lot number within a recorded subdivision is generally a resurvey. Since practically all laws regulating land divisions by plats require resurveying, there are exceptions to where the land platted was not originally surveyed. I thought I'd throw that out to the group here. Any thoughts about the difference between those two? Clarifications, experiences, court cases you're aware of?
Yeah, that one makes me a little uncomfortable. To me, a resurvey is simply a landowner hires you to go out and say subdivide a piece of property for him. You do a preliminary plat, and he wants it staked out on the ground. And so you go put out lot corners. And we actually had a client that did this one time with us. So, well, not even one time, several times. We'd go out and set the corners, and he'd want tall lath set on the corners, so he could go out there and wander around and look at everything and stand in the lot and look around and see where the views were and how the orientation came out. And then we wouldn't hear from him for a few months. He'd come back the next spring and say, well, I want to change this or move this to here and that and this. And we did it like about 4 times. And it was always his property, still owned by him, never conveyed to anybody. So even though we were out there setting monuments and laying out these different configurations, we never really created any boundaries because there was never any conveyance that created the boundary. And so it's all his property, and he can lay it out any way he wants to. And so he just went through 4 or 5 different iterations and over 4 or 5 years. And we finally ended up doing a final subdivision plat with him with his configuration, his final configuration. But and to me, that's a resurvey, is one that has never been sold before. So I'm kind of interested in this one where they're saying they're trying to call a subdivision where apparently they've set the 4 block corners, and then you've got, say, a series of 25-foot lots is the way I'm understanding what they're saying here. And the lots themselves aren't staked out, but the block corners are. And so they're saying the location of land described by lot number within a recorded subdivision is generally a resurvey. I still wouldn't call that a resurvey. If you're laying out the lot for the very first time, you're still following the written instructions on the plat as to where those lot corners go when you lay them out. And so that is an original survey, not a resurvey. And I think it completely misses the point that that land has to be still owned by the same person. Certainly they could go out and tell you to, oh, I want this, move this lot line over to here. And you could do an amended plat and stake a new lot line that has never been conveyed, some remnant of his property, but
I think,
is correct.
I think where they're pulling their definitions from is I've got the 73 manual up here right now from the PLS. And the manual does make a distinction between a retracement and a resurvey. A retracement is just going out there and tracing the lines that exist on the ground without establishing or reestablishing anything. And then they say a resurvey can be a reconstruction of the lines. It can be either a dependent or an independent resurvey. So I think what they're doing is they're leaning heavily on as is defined in the manual, as opposed to more of a broader perspective like what you're talking about.
Yeah, I understand that, Jerry. Yeah, and that's the definition that I would always lean to, is the manual's definition of dependent or independent resurvey. What we were doing there in that example I was given would be an independent resurvey.
Right.
A dependent resurvey, where you're out there trying to retrace even under the manual, a dependent resurvey is either done because it's still in the federal's public domain. And so you still have the one owner, the United States government, owning the property and saying, well, we want to eradicate and we'll take any found monuments in these original surveys, we'll strike them out, we'll destroy those monuments and start over with a resurvey. Or there's a second thing that you can do in the manual, which is a petition of the landowners, where they petition the government to come out and do a resurvey, a dependent resurvey of their property to reestablish missing monuments and such, which is more of a form of like a retracement survey, but it has the authority of an original when it's completed.
Mm.
All clear as mud there for everybody. I appreciate that. That's great. Thank you, guys. Any questions, or does that make sense to? Any follow-up from anyone else there? I apologize. I've got this glitchy like movement sensor light, so now it's going to be really dark in here. I can't flip it back on. I kept sitting there pressing it, so I apologize that I'm dark now.
Well, that's okay. It's not you that we're looking at anyway.
Good. Okay. Well, thank you for that clarification, that discussion. I'm going to jump ahead to, let's see, right before 11.7 here. Without trust, a boundary surveyor cannot function effectively. The boundary surveyor is engaged by people because they believe him or her capable of delivering a product or service, and that the product, usually a map, will be correct. And this is the one that kind of gets, I'm curious about this. This line here, and then 11.8, I just want to jump and read these two together. I know they're kind of separate, but as a matter of professional standing, professionals should not actively solicit clients in the matter of business people. They should not advertise or seek recognition in a self-lottery fashion. Standing in the surveying community, knowledge, prestige, and personal integrity are the foundations for success. Obtaining client results from referral, personal contact, and discreet notices of services rendered. The client may become aware of the need for a survey from various outside contacts. He or she may have similar experiences in the past and realize that this is a proper course of action. Or an attorney may advise that this survey is essential to settle a title problem. Occasionally, the client learns of surveying services from the descriptive literature found in abstractors' offices, real estate, title insurance, and the like. Much public education is needed to inform property owners when they need a survey of line described in their deed descriptions. They usually request a surveyor to conduct one. This can be likened to purchasing life insurance policy on one's property. This is a whole other topic we could seriously talk about, but I am lost as to why this was put in this chapter and why they would tell us not to go advertise and seek after surveys. I mean, I certainly can understand that I am very careful not to disparage another surveyor, even if I disagree, in an effort to maintain a professionality in a profession that has a reputation for that. But I am at a loss, and I would love someone to explain to me why.
One, how does it end up in this chapter, right? Describing, property descriptions by words or whatever, right? And I'm with you. Kind of, how does that end up in there? But I don't think Mr. Brown would be too happy with all my advertising then.
Yeah.
Well, the old from the 1960s code of ethics had that self-laudatory fashion advertisement thing, and used as one of the standard codes of ethics. It was done by it was prior to NCEES, but it was the early can't remember what they called it, the ACM, American Congress on Mapping, I think it wasn't the
ACSM.
wasn't even the ACSM.
ACSM, yeah.
Yeah, it wasn't ACSM, it was before ACSM.
Oh,
Where they renamed themselves to ACM or ACSM. So it goes way back. And at the time, there was also the same kind of restriction was imposed upon the attorneys. They couldn't advertise in self-laudatory fashion, and they couldn't basically advertise like an ambulance chaser, which we see all the time now. But at one point, I don't know, probably late 70s, early 80s, if I recall, the FCC came down on that code of ethics and said, no, you can't restrict your profession from how they advertise or how they choose to advertise themselves. They can't do it in a derogatory fashion where you're derogating a fellow professional, because that'll be slander and those kinds of things will start being raised. But this being advertising in a self-laudatory fashion, that language was actually put down by the FCC, and it really has no application in our profession anymore. The code of ethics doesn't. The current code of ethics, I don't think, has that language, but some of the states still have that old definition in their statutes.
Yeah, I mean, you just can't hit on keywords like I'm the best surveyor, or there's certain things.
Well, you can say you're the best.
Yeah.
Because best doesn't. They've got all sorts of weird advertising rules now.
Yeah.
But yeah, you can say you're the best. It doesn't mean that anybody else is worse than you.
Right. That's funny.
All sorts of, I mean, it's like product advertisements, the same kind of stuff. And that's the way the FCC looks at it, is you're advertising a product, and so there's a lot more flexibility in our profession nowadays. Not that I would encourage surveyors to go out there and try and advertise like an ambulance chaser, but gee, to tell somebody, hey, get a survey done, it's like having your own insurance policy on the location of your boundaries. It's a fact.
It'd be kind of interesting.
Emissions insurance,
That'd be kind of interesting. What would be an analogy of an ambulance chaser and surveying? I mean, what exactly?
Are you feuding with your neighbor? Call us today.
Well, but part of constructive advertising helps to inform the public as to why they need a survey, to a great extent. Because otherwise, if you don't advertise at all, you don't communicate at all, how do they? The only information that they get then about boundaries is from a realtor or something like that.
But then there's a fine line between the advertising. What point are you advertising, and what point are you educating?
Right. Yeah.
Right.
Well, I think I've got a good example of what that ambulance chasing might look like. So if you remember, about 2 or 3 months ago, we looked at a survey I've been working on for about a year now, where it's all the east line of a section, and everything shifted down about 30 feet. And we looked at possible location of the original monument, and the fences, might have matched that original location. It was set differently. Now everything's off. And so I was contacted by one of the landowners, because I'd done work for him somewhere else, and he bought this property and wanted to get it resolved. So I worked with him to do it. And so I had some options. I mean, I need to, as a matter of survey, work with maybe some of those adjoining parcels as I retrace his boundary. But I'm not going up and down that whole section and going knocking on every door and say, hey, did you know your boundary's wrong and you need a surveyor to fix it? I'm not looking through county records to see where there's deed gaps and overlaps. Hey, did you know your boundary's wrong and you need a surveyor to fix it? I'm not creating a problem where there may not have been one, where the understanding of the boundary line may not match the record. But because of that client knowing what he needed to do and talking with his neighbors, he has referred a number of his neighbors to me to resolve the entire section. And we're working through everything all at once now. But I think I could see that as being the example of that ambulance chaser, where I know there's a problem there and I start knocking on people's door, let them know there's a problem where they may not have known it before.
I heard a couple of historical stories here in California regarding some of that, and I've seen a couple of maps that epitomize this, and they're from about gold rush era in California, especially in San Francisco area, and up to probably 1890s to 1910s until there was a little bit more regulation. And some of the subdivision maps of the time looked, and they were actually published in some of the local newspapers. They looked about the same as I don't know, advertisements for snake oil and random potions and things like that. They were at the same level. And then also I gathered that some of that led towards people wanting to start using warranty deeds, because there was also included a lot of fraudulent land transactions, people trying to sell land that never really existed just because they had a pretty and loudly advertised map. So they and then that area also had the Benson Syndicate that created fraudulent surveys on a whole another scale. So it was in an attempt to stamp out those kinds of practices. They started adding the moral code and a damper on advertising, on very loud advertising practices, because they, to a degree, figured out, well, if something is a fraud, then it's to their benefit to be the loudest advertiser, because they're getting noticed the most, and people might believe them and go with them just because they're being the loudest. So I don't know if I'm retelling that story in a really good way, but that's kind of the drift of what I was hearing.
Thank you, Connor. Yeah, that I think that's a great example. So.
Yeah.
Okay, well, that's more time than I expected to get out of this, but I got the answer I needed, so I'm happy about it. So thanks, everybody.
we didn't get the main answer though. Why is it in this section?
This
chapter.
You need to invite Nettleman back. Get him in. Let's do a final video chat of all our grievances with the book. We'll invite him. He won't know the difference, and we'll just go through point by point of everything they did wrong.
There you go.
Maybe because a lot of advertising can be verbal. I don't know, by words.
Yeah.
I'm guessing.
Good point there.
Okay, well, so 11.7, I'm going to skip over this real fast, but I do want to read it. Erroneous decisions may lead to claims of negligence or malpractice. And so I think that's where I want to spend the rest of the evening here, is kind of going through the how to do a proper survey, the field procedures that this chapter really covers. And what I'm going to do is, I was just trying to pull up here, and it wasn't pulling up super fast. for my young guys, I've done a couple of kind of white sheets on just starting a new job. I'm going to share this. This is not all encompassing, but this is our kind of our talking point. Let's see if I can get this. So this goes through even on our network, right? How do we share something? So it's just creating a folder on the network and all that stuff, so we can ignore that. But this portion right here, so anytime, first thing we do, we've created a folder on the network, we've got the contract signed, we start a new job, we do this. We pull all applicable documents. Even if we don't think we need them, we go through and we pull everything. Adjoining deeds, adjacent surveys, section information, township information, you name it, we pull it, tie sheets, and we have a place where we save it and we print those all. I'm a paper person, so I kill a few trees and I print it all off, and but that way in a paper folder, when I send the crews out, and this is one of the things the book really talks about, is arming your field crews with everything. When we're looking at retracing a boundary described by words, that field crew is retracing those words, and they should have hopefully the knowledge of how to read the deed, but the training to take that deed as you're on the ground and start looking through things. We do everything by DXF and we draw it up, and I make it really easy for my guys. We've basically drafted all this before they're out in the field, so they actually have a map that's coordinate correct and calibrated to what they calibrate to. So as they're walking around the fence lines, they actually have this line to follow to kind of give them some parameters to work in, right? But this is one of the things the book talks about, is getting all that information in front of your field crews and giving them the best chance to look for evidence. And then we sit down before going out to the job and we talk about searching for called for monuments. If there are things that are called for, make sure to buzz around in this area in particular, because this survey says they set a rebar here, right? And we definitely want to find it. Or look in this area for some extra fences or evidence of occupation, because the deeds don't seem to match here and we need to figure out what's going on. Excuse me. Is there anything else you guys do to get your crews ready as that first step for going out in the field? Anything you'd add to that?
We're pretty similar, Trent, as well, pretty close to the same setup you got. Sometimes point of commencement too, if it's way away from a site, right? If you're just worried about maybe the southwest quarter of a section or southwest quarter or something like that, but the POC for one of the deeds is the northwest corner, right? You definitely got to make sure you have the northwest corner of the section. So so that kind of stuff would be, I guess, one of the things that we kind of look for, making sure that we pick up the right monumentation. Our big thing is closing the quarters on any project we do, but if that POC is not within that quarter, then obviously that's not going to work. So, but yeah, we're very similar setup. What you got there? What's your creating BC drawing? What does that mean?
That's our boundary calc drawing.
Okay. Yeah,
So that is mine, that I only touch, that no one else really gets into. It's particularly once the boundary's resolved, so there's nothing snapped or wrong. So we keep it pretty simple, BC. Then our construction one is CS for construction staking and small things like that.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Yeah, the only thing we don't do 5,000. So I know we talked about that a couple of weeks ago, but
yeah.
Yep.
Anyone else want to throw some thoughts, ideas, things you do different, better, things that you learned from the book and kind of getting those field crews ready?
Yeah, no, our process is about the same as what you just described. Oh, hey, Trent, I actually had one of those over advertised maps. I emailed you a copy in case you want to show it once you receive that email.
Yeah, let me pull up.
It's not the most ostentatious example, but you'll get the drift.
I love it. Okay. So getting back to this pre-crew, pre-going out there, all these documents. This book talks about research responsibility. So Principle 8 said, as a minimum, a boundary surveyor who decides to make a survey or retracement from a written description assumes the responsibility for obtaining copies of necessary adjoining conveyances called for in the legal description furnished, all maps called for, pertinent recorded adjoining surveys, public agency maps that are kept in such a form that they are available, and 5 in the GLO states the original government township plats and field notes. So that's one of the challenging things, right? There's another portion that said without respect to time, right? And one of those principles. And this is one of those hard things. I ended up going down to the county courthouse today to pull deeds from 1908 on a survey that I'm doing right now that didn't even show up in the title report, but were referenced somewhere else, and I had to go pull them. And so even relying on a title report to be complete, is difficult. The responsibility lies in us to pull everything we can. And so I thought as part of this, we'll go over, again, I said we'd be doing a lot of reading out of the book here. Most states have minimum standards for research that indicate to what extent research should be taken. It is vitally important for the surveyor to research and trace description documents to their origin. This is not to ensure that the title, but to ensure that the description is the one that created the original boundary lines. Some of the reasons are as follows. Since many descriptions are copied from one deed to the other, errors in transcribing and copying occur. And worst of all, some elements of the description are omitted. A great example of that is I am working on a survey that called to the south line of an easement. Didn't show up in the title report, didn't show up in deeds for the last 70 years. And 2 other surveyors had actually done a survey on this parcel. And, there were some questions in my mind. I actually found that old deed. It is necessary to know with certainty the date of the description or conveyance so that the intent of the parties can be determined. As to the words and phrases included in the description, at law, all words have the intent and meaning at the time of the writing. When it comes to the interpretation of deeds and descriptions, the cardinal rule for construction of deeds is that the intention of the parties is to be ascertained and given effect, as gathered from the entire instrument, or as some courts say, within the 4 corners, together with the surrounding circumstances, unless such intention is in conflict with some unbending canon of construction or settled rule of property, or is repugnant to the terms of the grant. 3, to determine junior senior rights and descriptions. I'm going to cut these off a little bit. 4, to ascertain the origins of the courses identified in the original descriptions. Since many bearings in early descriptions are magnetic bearings, the date of the course creation must be known. 5, to find early references to surveys, agreements, and easements that may not have been carried forth into recent descriptions. 6, to determine whether any agreement concerning boundary location have been filed since the creation of title and boundaries. And 7, to determine whether any easements have been created that either benefit or burden the parcel being searched. Often easements are created early on or in the beginning document and are not mentioned in subsequent documents. Any thoughts, comments? Trent, I saw you post. Is this the Dropbox? Is that what Connie sent over?
Yeah, she sent over that map, so I threw that in the Dropbox so we could look at
Thank
it.
you. That helps out.
Yep.
Let me pull this up here. Olney and Company, positive sale of Oakland property.
On liberal credit and easy terms. Nice.
Are any of you guys podcast people? There is a podcast about Southern California, the ghost city that never happened, the guys that were taken for millions of dollars. They lotted it and put half roads out there. There's a podcast, I think it's called The City.
California City.
Yeah, California City. But the podcast, I think, is called City. They did one about development in in Chicago that was really fascinating about how they got the freeways in and the mob got involved to help the state and corrupt cities and governments. But they did a second season there in California about that, and the surveys and the deeds to all that was really fascinating. But that just made me think of that. Your podcast people, The City, I think that's what it's called. Well, thank you for sharing that. That's great. That's great.
Mhm.
Jump over here.
Yeah, I just recently ran across this one on an actual project. Going, oh wow, that must be what they're talking about.
Yeah.
I think that's the link to that podcast you were just talking about, Trent.
I'll
California.
look it up.
Yeah, I do. Okay, so research. Getting back to research here. This is paramount, right? This is what we've been talking about. All the different things we're looking into. So any other questions, comments on research? Why we do this research? Or questions for our younger guys, how to do that research? And this is a great time to ask that question. State to state's a little different. I'll tell you my trick, right or wrong. I go to any recorder's office or surveyor's office, particularly if I'm unfamiliar with that area, and I play dumb and usually can get someone there to help me find most of the documents I need. But
Playing dumb is a great way to go. You want to get help? Play dumb. Yeah.
It's not hard for me either.
It's not hard for me at all.
It works at home too.
I wish. My wife knows better though.
I will say Steve Parrish's line is which we've talked about a couple of times on here. Research, what a surveyor does when it comes to research separates the good surveyor from the great surveyor, right? And so research is everything. And that's the difference that Steve Parrish likes to push.
There is one
Research is a-
statement here that I get a little hung up on, and that's the one where they say that you always have to do this research back to the parent parcel, or to determine junior senior rights and such. But you really only need junior senior rights if you've got an overlap or gap issue where you've got two different documents telling you two different locations for the same boundary. And I always started the current deed and the current adjoiners, and if they're all in harmony, I don't need to chase anything back, because if I find a problem, well, the problem has been resolved by the time it got to the current ones, because there's no problem in the current ones. And so I'll only research back to the chain of title, back on the chain of title to origin when I need to. And that's an extra, and it's something that's above and beyond most surveys that we have to do. And so I don't see any need to do that every time. And the book is kind of the way they say it is like, yeah, you will always search back to the original document. I disagree.
Yeah, with research, you don't know how long it's going to take on any job. You can guess, yeah, based on your experience, how long you've been doing it. You can take a shot in the dark, 1 day, 2 days, 16 hours, 24 hours of time for doing research. But it's whatever it takes to help you sleep at night, to make sure that when you present that survey to the judge, that you got it all there. And it may go way over what you budgeted, or you may guess right.
Yeah, and that leads me to the second point, which is when you take the approach of, yeah, I'll pull the current deeds, and that's the standard practice. If there's disharmony in those deeds, well, yeah, I'll call the client and say, I got to stop work here because there's some ambiguity, some uncertainty, there's some dispute. I've got to do additional research. I want to get paid for that, for the hard stuff. And so then we'll do some addendums on the contract until we get the research done and the problem resolved, and to my satisfaction, then I'll fire back up on the contract and complete it at the agreed upon price. But you got to have that room in there for those unknowns. we throw it in for weather and all the other conditions, missing monuments, things like that. But yeah, discovery of ambiguity, uncertainties, and disputes. Yeah, I'm going to stop work and we're going to concentrate on the hard stuff for a while.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I purposely skipped over. There's a section right above what we're talking about. Initial conference with clients and contracts with clients. I skipped over that because that might be the week 2. I know Mentoring Mondays has done a lot about contract law and contracts in surveys. So I didn't want to spend too much time because I know we've talked about that a lot, but that was when I was going to say for either week 2 or the end. But a lot of what you're saying right there goes back to a well-written contract or communication or good communication with a client up front. I gave a lunch and learn yesterday at my company all about proposals and how to write a proper proposal and what needs to be in there. And in preparing for that, I often will take phone calls just over the phone, right? Hey, I need a property survey. Yeah, that's $2,000. I know the area. It's a lot survey. It's, I know what to expect in that area. And I get the yes or the no or the polite I'll call you back but never do. And in getting this proposal and thinking about that, one thought that came into my mind is I'm going to try and get an email address and follow up with those people, because one thing I try and explain, I try and set myself apart. Getting back to the advertising, I guess it totally fits. Mind blown here, it fits because I'm going to get back to the advertising part. I try to explain to them what goes into the survey, right? I tell them that I'm going to go do research. I'm going to go tie to government monuments. I've got to go then do the survey of their property. I may or may not at that time set the corners if I or my field guys feel comfortable setting the corners. So we may have to bring it back to the office and evaluate it and then go back out to set the corners. And then I complete the record of survey that gets filed at the county. And I always try on any phone call to give all that information so when they get the $500 quote versus my $2,000 quote, they see the difference between it. But I realized in preparing for this that I'm going to try and get an email address and reiterate that to everybody. But that's important so they know up front exactly what process you need to go through to get that done, and then proper contracts so that you can hit pause or stop if needed to and reset if you're having issues.
Well, that's good, because sometimes all that hand holding that you're giving them for free right now, they come back and say, oh, this guy really knows what he's talking about, and I will go ahead and use them. The other side's true also, that sometimes they just take that free information and say, okay, that's nice, bye.
Yeah, it doesn't affect me if you don't file the record of survey. No one's going to come after me for that one. That's on you, surveyor, for charging that much. And
Yep.
I just need to know where it is.
Teresa threw in the California requires written contracts. Nevada requires written contracts as well. So there's states that require, as part of statute, written contracts before you begin any work. So
Just doesn't mean it always happens, though.
yeah, no, I know.
Going back to this then, thank you guys. Location of easements. I do like this. Surveyor should never agree to locate all existing easements relating to or affecting property. The surveyor should merely agree to locate those easements in accordance with furnished descriptions and those that are visible or of public record. That's an interesting when I see surveys out there that say this survey contains no easements and every caveat to try and protect themselves from that. Or other surveys that are just, they ignore the easement part, they show no easements, and it's just the boundary. Curious thoughts, questions, comments on that one. That was one that kind of got my mind thinking about what I've seen and what I do. And there might be a reason.
Isn't one of the things, though, the location of all easements would be dependent upon what type of survey you're doing? Like if we're doing for ALTAs or we're doing parcel maps in California, of course, we show everything that's written on the PTR that's provided. And we can't make it up. We find it on other maps. We find it on other record maps. So we should do it in accordance with what type of instrument you're creating.
That is true, but
Yep.
I don't think you have to. I don't think it's a requirement on the record of surveys.
No, not a
And
record of
it's
survey, but
definitely not
parcel
required
maps.
on a
and-
corner record.
No, but it just depends upon the type of instrument. So if you're
Right.
filing a final parcel map or a final map or ALTA, then those requirements or location.
Agreed.
But I would
Yeah,
throw out there, even on an ALTA, your requirement, at least for easements, and those that know this better than me, I believe my responsibility for easements stops at the title report, right? Those are the exceptions that the title company is taking and not willing to ensure. Unless I find something in those records that's not shown, we can have that discussion, but I'm not going outside of that title report to find stuff that's not there readily.
Yeah.
So-
Go ahead.
So what do you do if you know, we have this thing in California that's called SDG&E that, you know, they have all these easements, but none of them recorded, you know? What do you do when you find telephone line or a gas line and there's nothing, no easements of record? Do you stop your search?
I will note them as substantial features located in the process of the survey
On an ALTA or in general?
on an ALTA.
Yeah. I mean, when we do a boundary survey, it's limited to literally just a boundary survey unless we're asked for to specifically locate easements. Then we ask for the title report. I mean, you ask for a title report for a boundary survey too, but plotting of location and plotting on easements is excluded unless somebody specifically needs encumbrances shown. In that case, we prepare a boundary and encumbrance map. And then on a record of survey, you're not required to show easements unless you monumented them or and I lost my train of thought, so go ahead.
Well, I can think of a couple, I would call it a utility survey versus a retracement survey, where someone wants to add a barn to the back of their property and there's like an overhead power line easement, right? So the purpose of the survey is less about the boundary and more about where is that utility easement so they can place construction material, you know, a barn or whatever it is in the back. And so that would be kind of seven. But then again, I'm not saying I've located all the easements. The purpose, and my narrative describes, the purpose of this survey is to establish the extents of the, you know, electrical line easement for the purpose of constructing a new barn in the rear portion of the property. You know, and I go through how I establish that easement in relation to the property lines.
Yeah, I think we need to be careful not to fall into the trap of well, a boundary survey has these things, an ALTA has these things, this kind of product has those things, you know, utility survey has those things. What we have to be focused on is the needs of the client, because if the client says, well, I need a boundary survey, they don't know what they're ordering. They've never seen one in their life, never had to call a surveyor, and they were told that they had to. They need one of those surveys. So they don't necessarily know what they need. And so they don't, and you can say, okay, yeah, you would need a boundary survey. Okay, well, you know, give you some canned product that fails to meet their ultimate needs because no, they did plan on building a barn in the corner, and yeah, the easement would have been is something that's important for that project. So we have to make sure, and there are plenty of cases where we've got this certain standard of care to produce a certain product, and then because of the specific needs of the client, that standard of care is raised. So the bar is raised to another standard. One in particular it's not the Bellevue Jones case. There's another case where a surveyor was requested to go out and do a survey of the property, originally for closing, and did his survey. And then he was requested to go back out and do the easements. He got a copy of the easement documents, went out and surveyed the easements according to the record, showed the record position of these easements. And then in the process of course, building their building, they find out that the corner of the building is over top of a sewer line or a storm drain line or something like that, that the state had relocated as part of their highway project, and they had acquired a new easement or a license actually to permission to relocate this line. And because he went in and he got a copy of the highway drawings, the right-of-way drawings, like we do, concerned with the boundaries, and it showed the location of this utility line that he showed on his map. And it turned out that this relocated line was only shown on their construction drawings. So had the surveyor done an additional amount of research to recover a copy of the construction drawings, it showed where the relocation was, and they would have been on alert then of the problem that was being created. So the court basically said, no, you're held to this additional standard of care because of these certain needs of the client. And they had expressed that the needs to the surveyor, that they needed to know where the utility lines were and where the easements were, so they didn't have any conflicts. So we just have to be careful to make sure we meet the needs of the client and don't just chase some product, some canned product.
I think that goes back to the client consultation, the initial consultation to find out what they need and what they don't need. But yeah, that's a tough one.
Yeah, how many times
Yes.
you get a call from an architect that they need an alta, right? Really, they just want a boundary topo, but they only know it as an
Mhm.
alta, right? And so that happens, geez, a couple times a month, when it comes from an architect. So
Yep.
yeah, it goes back to educating the client, right? Which we've had those conversations almost every week as well, right? And that's educating the client and figuring out exactly what they need and what they want. So I do like your point of different levels of standard of care, though, John. It's interesting thought. There should be one level of standard of care, but I do get your point there.
Okay, well, thanks, guys. I appreciate that. Yeah, it goes back to that contract portion, right? Having
Yeah.
a conversation with your client,
Yeah.
and understanding what their needs are. And we get in discussions about how surveyors don't like to talk to people and lone wolves and all that type of stuff. But there are, and in this conversation I was having Monday night at the STEM fair, I had young kids there, and Trent, you're doing a great job. You've got your little poster that shows the 2 routes for surveying, right? But there are those people that I've got a great crew chief. He could be licensed if he decided to, but he doesn't want to talk to people. He wants to crew chief. He wants to survey. I trust him with boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
The whole thing, but that's just not his gig. And my personality lends me to almost more project management and less boundary resolution as I get people raising up underneath me and coming into those positions. And so it is more talking with clients and it's just helping people find where that part is, and working, whether you're a lone company or in a bigger firm, finding those roles that fit you best and getting that. Getting back into this field work then, kind of how we do it. The second phase of research that may be considered as field work is the field work proper, which is equally important to the office work. The ultimate quality of field work is totally dependent on the quality of the initial office research and the information that is taken to the field. And so this is, and I was going to pull one up, and I couldn't find I had one that I love that was a completed one, but I've got it. Here, let me share this again. This is too many windows open now.
My dad always said the more time you spend doing office work, the easier the field work will go. And more times than not, that's what it was.
Absolutely correct. So in my company, we use paper 3-ring binders, and that is our field book, our field Bible. So the front of that, it's got the job number, job name, address. In the front cover, it's got client contacts if needed, anything like that. And the first however many pages is all that research we've done. And it's punched and it's in there, deeds, surveys, plats, and it's all right there for the surveyors to use. The next page, and we always print it on orange. My orange paper here for my printer. We always print it on orange. We call it our orange sheet. And that's what this is. This is our blank one. And it's got all the survey stuff you need, check into control and all that type of stuff. But this is the step-by-step. Hey, these are the things as a licensed surveyor that I need out of this survey. You know, yeah, I need you to go hit fences. I need you to go hit that stuff. But in my research, here are the key things to hit. Here are the section corners we need. Here's all this location. So sometimes this work description can be, you know, a page long depending on the survey. And then the crews all have their own field books that they keep personally. And I know there's a lot of discussion to have about job field books versus personal field books, but this is kind of ours. So any key notes that they need to convey to our QA, QC, or our draft or whatever it is, goes right there. And it's followed by sketches or anything they've pulled from the field. But this is our crew line out to give them that information. That office research has been done. We want to give it to them, and this is how they get that. Besides just sitting down with me or a senior surveyor and going through expectations of that survey. You guys do it similar, differently?
Yes. You know, speaking of lunch and learns, I just did a lunch and learn in our company on putting together field work plans, because I do a lot of those, especially for boundary surveys, and we have a couple of new hires that are going to be helping me. So same thing, we formalized the process several years ago, and now I'm disseminating that information. The research, how to do the research, how to do the calcs, how to position things on a coordinate system, what coordinate system to use or not use. We also have primary, secondary, tertiary points that need to be searched for. You know, phone numbers to call me. I usually have the guys call me 2 or 3 times throughout the day. First, once they do their recon and figure out, you know, you always get the feel at the beginning of what you think you're going to be finding, or after a couple of monuments, you get the feel for the condition of the whole site. So I usually have them call me after they do that, and then we strategize which of the primary monuments might be the ones that they're going to be finding first, so that we can on the fly decide, do we have enough control or not? And then, you know, from that we proceed to expanded primaries, and then into secondaries, and then into whatever other magic you're going to have to try to use to retrace the boundary. And so we give them a PDF of the points. I put very detailed descriptions of what it is that they have to search, that they're searching for, so that they can identify whether they're finding the right monument, or whether they should keep digging, or they should, you know, look 3 feet over if they didn't find the right monument. Or what else? I put a summary of what the goal of survey is right on the work plan. They usually get an 11 by 17 or sometimes bigger sketch of basically your classic point search map with primary, secondaries outlined, the goal of the survey, my phone number, a short legend. Then we have the sheets, just like you mentioned, that give a lot of technical specifications, sometimes down to the data collector files, which notes are expected, who's expecting notes. I go over the precision and field procedures that I'm going to need to get certain accuracy, because lately we've been having a mix of some really tight urban areas and others where we're surveying out in the desert, and historically monumentation is within plus or minus 2 feet. So all of that gets quantified up front and sent to the field crew, including, after I do the comprehensive research, then I isolate which maps or documents or corner records or field notes are critical for the field guys to actually have there to verify the monuments. So I make sure that they get copies of those. And actually a lot of that just gets uploaded to them directly, except for the party chiefs that I know like paper copies. And then we're right now testing the system where I can actually see live as they're finding certain monuments, and it feeds right back into our GIS, including the pictures of their setups, so that along with them, I can also start getting the feel for what they're finding, how they're finding it, how hard it is, so that by the time they actually call me to discuss it, I will have already seen what they found and what condition they found it in. So we're kind of speeding up the process that way and giving me more opportunity to make on the fly intelligent decisions without actually being out there myself. So a lot of exciting stuff happening in that avenue. So that was a summary of an hour-long lunch learn right here.
I love it.
I probably missed a few things.
One thing I also do, I'll add to that is on particularly complex, or like John put it, that next level of requirement. You know, I'll tell the guys, once you get localized there, give me a call when you're wrapping that up, and I'll drive out there. Let's go walk it together, right? Particularly with my younger guys, that just happens, right? As I do that mentoring with them, but even my experienced guys, let's just go walk it. I need to get a feel for what you guys are seeing. So, you know, I set time aside for that. I did a very simple boundary lot survey. I mean, I found 2 front corners. It was as simple as could be. And by happenstance, I had not planned to go out to this. I had my senior surveyor out there. I mean, all these things that just make it really simple for me. And by happenstance, I did need to go out there and go look at it. I was in the area and did, because there's some other questions about some encroachments. Our client was encroaching when they thought it was the other way around. So I did end up going out there, but she disagreed with the findings of my survey and, you know, refused to pay the bill and came back with, you know, what level of survey is this that you didn't even come out there to set the actual corners? You're the licensed survey and all this. And you know, I'd explained to her that, you know, the trust that I have in my guides, but also the responsible duty I have to train them and keep them, you know, responsible charge duties, and how they are an extension of my license when they're out there doing that. And I trust the work they're doing. But when it does get complicated like that, or if I do need to defend it, I'm going to go walk it, right? How could I ever defend it, especially if it was getting to that point? If I've never been on site, it's impossible to defend at that point, because I might see something that someone else misses. Or if it gets to that point, I send a second crew out there to go look for stuff that the first one might have missed. It's all part of that level of gathering that you have to do. I love it. I appreciate it. Any other thoughts, things you guys do different or would add into that?
Actually, one more thing that I forgot to mention that we do that I absolutely love is we call them monument recovery sheets, and I can email you an example of it. I require each monument needs 3 pictures. I want the vicinity of where first one is going to be a Google Maps snapshot, which actually our software does automatically for them. Second one is going to be the vicinity of the monument from I don't know 10 to 20 feet away, because a lot of times, especially if we're not doing topo at the same time, I'm still going to want to see if there's evidence of lines of occupation. Sometimes I might want to see the ground and see if that monument has an indication of being disturbed. A lot of times, you know, is that pipe 1.5 inches or 1.25 inches or 1.75 inches? What did they really call it? I want a close-up of the actual monument so that I can read everything. And then they're collecting that on in a little database, and there's about 7 or 8 prompts in as they're recording that monument that asks them for condition, for depth, for full description, short description, the tag number, so that we minimize the occurrences of where they don't collect sufficient data about the monument, or sometimes, you know, it'll get into the data collector as well from the app, but sometimes longer descriptions have a tendency to get truncated, especially when you run things, for example, through StarNet adjustment. So we needed something to fall back on to actually get a long description of the document of the monument, so that all the relevant information gets recorded. And then also, I also required that, especially when it's a monument that we've been looking for and are not finding, I asked them to get the same monument recovery sheet and show me the picture of the actual hole. You know, I mean, there were a couple of times where I had them dig 3-4 feet down to bedrock to prove that a township closing corner to a rancher line didn't exist anymore. Because sometimes, you know, you get, it goes to a county surveyor and they go, oh yeah, you looked, how hard did you really look? Well, here's the picture. So a lot of those things are helping a lot, supplementing the information for, you know, when I'm unable to go out on the field myself and you know, I've witnessed all of that for myself.
So I've got tons of questions here because I think I know how you're doing it, but I want to know. So I stopped sharing the book. We're gonna have to do, Trent, we're gonna have to do week 2 on this chapter for sure.
Absolutely.
But before I start going one-on-one with Connie, and we're gonna riff here for a second. Justice did say, we are encouraging geotagging of found monuments. Trimble data collectors have this option, attaching a picture to its coordinate. This avoids imaginary found monuments. And I know TopCon does this too. They've got a way to even kick out like a monument recovery report in TopCon equipment. I think Trimble does this. QK does this with TBC. Teresa, what's QK?
Probably.
Sorry,
nursery.
that's the company I work for, QK.
Okay.
We do
Yeah.
that with Trimble Business Center. So if we bring it up within, actually, what do we use? Yeah, the TBC, when we're looking at the points, we can bring up the images when the guys take them and we attach them to that point. So I can go and look at the monument they found without asking them, in case the description they put on the monument is too short or not good enough.
Wonderful. Yeah, I know that's even getting back to kind of what Connie was saying. If they don't find a monument, I asked my guys to shoot a point, searched here, nothing found, so that I know they at least walked over there and looked, right? So Connie, I've got a couple questions for you that I think might help everybody. There's a lot of options for doing these geotagging or things like that. One company I worked for a long time used, it's an Esri product. I think it was like Survey
123.
Survey 123. Is that what you're using to do that?
That's what we started with, but I'm fortunate to be in a big company, so we actually have our own GIS department, and we were, through our GIS people, we were able to customize and write our own app, kind of build on the Survey 123. So now the way it happens, I can actually, once I have my search points, they can be ported into GIS together with monument descriptions and everything else. And then once each one of those points is searched and actually literally shot, and the guys take pictures, then all that data transfers from the search point coordinate and snaps onto the actual located point that then shows up back on our GIS server together with the pictures, so that it can happen real time. So that happens on our GIS server. So both our data collectors and the guys' cell phones with Survey 123 app are connected to the GIS server with our company. So that's kind of the overview of how we solve that, how we're going about it. And then the future of that is then throughout these monument recovery sheets, once I go back in a review, then I will be adding the entire monument pedigree as I'm analyzing the boundary. So then I will have a one spot where the field information and the entire monument pedigree is kind of contained in one sheet in one spot. Kind of
yeah.
almost wishing that we can submit color copies of that as corner records or something, but we'll see. So we keep that for every project, every single monument that we find. So we kind of, because then we can pull it up and see, how long ago have we worked in what area, what's close by, where do we already have control. And we do this for found monuments, but we do that also for our internal control, except that one, I don't deal with that as much. So
I like it. I used to use Survey 123. We used it for our field notes that got uploaded. Hey, this is the control we checked into, start time, end time, mileage on the truck, all that type of stuff. And then also for safety sheets. We worked for a company that required a daily pre-job safety brief for our clients. And so we did 2 sheets. We did our job brief to go to the survey manager, and then a safety sheet that went to the safety person, and then they could upload those and print them off into a sheet that got submitted to the clients, which was really great. That's a great program with those that are unfamiliar with it. Survey 123. So that's an Esri add-on. You can, if you have some sort of GIS database or Esri product, you can do that. Certainly, most of the major survey equipment manufacturers have some sort of capability of that. I know Trimble Access gives you that kind of that real-time connectivity, and there's a lot of things like that. But I think that's a great discussion of how to manage and work with field crews, ensuring that they're getting you what you need, getting back to that responsible charge and the trust there. Some great discussions. Anything to add? Questions, comments on that? Okay, well, thanks you guys for sharing. Justice, Teresa, Connie, for sure, for walking us through what you guys do.
Before we jump,
yeah.
Before we jump off, Justice sent an email this morning that he has been notified he passed his PS exam. So.
Excellent.
Congrats.
And he's a lover of both of these platforms. So I wanted to share that. I wanted to share that. So yeah, exactly. It's good stuff.
Well, I think that's a good stopping point. We've got a lot to talk about we're not back in 2 weeks. Are we? Are we hitting Thanksgiving that time?
Yeah, exactly. So we would go, I guess the week of the 14th. That would be the last one for the kind of the year. So
okay.
So we're almost a month. Yeah, December 14th.
December 14th.
Yeah.
Okay, and that would be the last one for the year, jumping back into January.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay.
Sweet.
I think the rest of this book's going to go pretty fast because we were starting to get to the point where we've talked about a lot of the chapters in our discussions like today. So I think that's great. Trent's got somewhere to be. He's got a cool little party to go attend. So
that's right.
We won't keep you longer. Appreciate you guys jumping on and helping out, and we'll see you in a month or so.
Great discussion as always. Awesome, guys.
Thanks,
Thank
guys.
you.
See ya.
Have a good night, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.